not so much as the main focus of my talk, but rather as the ground for morality for someone like Aristotle, who was a sort of moral realism. So instead of looking at the unity of the person directly, I'm going to look at the functional role, if you want, the metaphysical role that the unity of the person plays within an ethical system like that of Aristotle, which is a realist ethical system. And I hope that this will also give us some insights into the metaphysics of the unity of person, as it were, by the way. So I briefly introduce here what the moral challenge is for those who think about ethics. The moral challenge is what is it for a moral judgment to be true or false. So I put on the slide some examples, or not exactly, but you can think of the examples you may want. So for each of these sentences put on the slide, you may think this is wrong, or this is right. But the question I want to ask you to think about with me is what is it for each of these moral statements to be right or wrong? And of course the debate is very hot today as much as it was in antiquity, and we could group the positions maybe into two, the realist on the one hand and the anti-realism on the other hand. And in antiquity, these positions were represented by, for example, Plato, who is, I call him a robust moral realist, because he thinks that, yes, there is a definite answer to these questions, and the answer has to do with the form of the good, which is transcendent form, there are forms. Then there is the radical alternative of Protagoras, who is an extreme moral relativist. And then there is Aristotle, who, as I say, I introduce here as a moderate moral realist. And I'm going to focus on Aristotle, and I'm going to present an Aristotelian account, in that it is an account that is grounded on Aristotle's texts, but it puts them together in an original way. So it's not all Aristotle's directly, it's an Aristotelian position that I'm going to put to you. So I'm going to talk about the unity of person as the ground for moderate moral realism in an Aristotelian universe. So the first thing I want to put to your consideration is something that immediately will feel at odds with what you think when you think about moral realism. Aristotle is pretty explicit that the good person always knows what the right thing to do is in any set of circumstances in life. So I put the text up there. The good person discriminates correctly in every set of circumstances. And in every set of circumstances, what is true is apparent to him. So how is it that this claim can be the starting point of Aristotle's moral realism? Aristotle gives us this clue. The good person always knows what the right thing to do is in any set of circumstances, because the good person is the measure of what is good. It's the carpenter's rule, or it is as if the carpenter's rule, and you can see this at the bottom of the quotation I gave you. Now, just a clarification here. When Aristotle talks about the carpenter's rule, he means something like being a thermostat. I think it would be a more appropriate analogy. So something that can register the presence of goodness in the world. Something to whom the goodness or badness in the world reveals itself. And there are obvious connections here with McNauers that might be interesting to explore in discussion if you want. So how can the good person be the carpenter's rule in relation to goodness? Is this begging the question? So if what makes the judgments of a good agent objectively good for truly desirable objects, then if the reason is that the moral agent is a good moral agent, that seems circular. So Aristotle is not answering the question of what is it that grants moral goodness. But of course Aristotle has lots of resources, intellectual resources, philosophical resources, and he has an answer that goes beyond this apparent circularity. So we want to explore with him what is it that makes the morally good agent a good moral agent. What is it that is moral goodness? And here I introduce the thesis that I'm going to argue for in the paper. So the thesis is that in this Aristotelian account, moral goodness is not the feature of human nature, but rather it is an achievement by the human agent. This achievement consists in the attainment of a certain type of dynamic unity of the person, and this is my connection to the conference topic. So being virtuous, as we would say in modern terms, amounts to achieving a certain type of dynamic unity within the psychological features that we have as human beings and the biological features that characterize us as human beings. And that's what I'm going to argue for. So the question is, what is good to be found? So if we're not Plato, if we don't think in terms of robust moral realism position, where there are, when there is something like the form of the good that is our starting point, how do we start? How would an Aristotelian start this quest for what is good? Now, what's interesting here is that Aristotle surprises us by starting by looking, as it is usual in his methodology, at cases. So instances in the world, but the instances in the world that he's looking at are surprising because they're going to reveal something to us about what Aristotle thought about human nature. Here is another quotation that is quite central, so we'll return to it. What is Aristotle's starting point? Examples. Examples of what? Examples of performances. So Aristotle says, for the goodness or efficiency of a flute player, or sculptor, or craftsman of any sort, and in general, anybody who has some function of business to perform is thought to reside in that function. So goodness is performing well in the performance, in the function that someone is undertaking to perform. That's Aristotle's starting point. Now, what's interesting about this approach is that it reveals to us that Aristotle is thinking about biology, roughly speaking, as a set of processes going on, and particularly relevant to us, Aristotle is thinking of being human as being, as performing, being a human being. So being a human being is a performance. Being a human being is a process, it's a performative process, it's performing in being a human being. And again, I'm just gesturing here. This will be very interesting for further explorations for ethics, but I'm not spending time on them just now for reasons of time. So if being good is performing well one's function, then the obvious question is, what is the function of a human being? That's a question on which oceans of ink have been spent in the literature, but I think I'll have a few things that are new to tell you about this. There's a famous function argument in Aristotle. So I put it back again on the slide just to refresh your memory of it, but also to make you feel how strange it seems to us to see that being a human being as a performance of a certain function is compared by Aristotle to the performance of playing the flute, or being a sculptor, or being a craftsman. So do we really think that human beings have a function? Is this an insight of Aristotle, or is it a blunder of Aristotle? Just check it in your mind for a second. It's much less intuitive than it might seem that human beings have a function. And Aristotle himself captures this sense of difficulty with the idea of human beings having a function by qualifying his statement. So in this slide I highlighted the last bit where Aristotle says, if human being has a function. So it's not as assertive as it might have appeared at first reading. Now, what is it then for human beings to have a function? Can human beings have a function? And Aristotle here, I want to say, is not quite helpful. So in trying to explain, in trying to argue that human beings have functions, which is not assuming, as you can see, it's an if, Aristotle compares human beings with human organs. And I'm going to say that this is not helpful as an analogy. So it makes us think. Aristotle thinks or says that human beings have functions, like an eye has a function, a hand has a function, a foot has a function. What's the problem? Just pause and think for a second. What's the problem? Let's not be easily convinced by Aristotle. Well, the problem is that an eye, a hand, an organ in the human body has a function that is subservient to the overall function of the organism within which it is. So an organ serves a purpose that is external to itself. And immediately, particularly here, I imagine there are a few Kantians among you. Would you say that human beings have a purpose that goes beyond being a human being? What's the purpose of being a human being? Being a human being? I mean, it doesn't look like that we can think of a human being being part of something else that provides the purpose of being a human being. And particularly within Aristotle's system, the problem is that Aristotle is pretty explicit that substances cannot be part of substances. So I I think this is genuinely unhelpful on Aristotle's part. And the questions for us that remain open at this point is, can we go along with Aristotle with the idea that natural biological beings and human beings in particular have a function, question mark, and if they have a function, which kind of function do they have? So to make progress, I submit to you that Aristotle needs to find some functions that human beings perform that is subject to success or failure, and that is, and to be subject to success or failure, it needs to be goal-directed. So reaching the goal is success, and not reaching the goal is success. And that fits well with this idea of flute playing, sculpting, and so on and so forth, because the flute player plays well, and then is a successful flute player. So we need to think about actions, processes, activities. I'm using these terms as synonymous, which have a goal, they are directed towards a goal, and therefore can fail to succeed. But also, we need to think of functions that have a goal that is not outside itself, it's not external to the function, because human beings are not like eyes, they're not like hands, they're not like hearts, they're not part of something else. So, yes, processes cannot be good or bad unless they serve a goal, as Aristotle thinks, because if they have no goal, they cannot succeed or fail. And success or failure is what Aristotle is going to use as a criterion for good or bad. Aristotle does not argue though for this point. He finds it analytic. He thinks it's obvious that a process cannot be good or bad if it does not serve a goal. Maybe he's finding it as an analytic idea within the Greek for function, which is ergon, but we don't have any explicit argument. On the other hand, Aristotle does spend time arguing that having a goal does not presuppose an agent setting the goal. So his argument is quite amusing, and that's why I put it on the slide. So Aristotle is contrasting his point of view with that of ordinary people. And he says, it is strange for people to think that there is no end or goal unless they see an agent initiating the motion by deliberation, says Aristotle. Even crafts do not deliberate, yet they clearly have a goal. Moreover, and here is the punchline I find really amusing, if the shipbuilding crafts were in the wood, it would produce a ship in the same way that nature would. And so, if what something is for is present in craft, it's also present in nature. So Aristotle, with this argument, is telling us that there can be natural processes that have inbuilt goals, even if there is no agent that sets that goal. And to prove this argument is asking us to think of a thought experiment where the activity of shipbuilding, we are asked to imagine, is inbuilt in wood. So wood would spontaneously build ships, and it would have a goal without there being an agent. So Aristotle is representing the idea that natural processes can have goals that are called undeliberated, because there is nobody deliberating for that goal. So let's assume with Aristotle that it has been established that there are goal-directed processes in nature that don't have an agent that sets the goal to that process. Now, which kind of processes in nature can instantiate this idea of there being goal-directed natural processes? And Aristotle is not explicit here, but I think what he's thinking is that there are processes in nature which have a beginning and an end, are suitable for instantiating goal-directedness types of activities or processes. But again, the question arises, how is the end and the beginning of a process demarcated when the process is continuous? And I supply on behalf of Aristotle the idea that what demarcates the end process, the end points in a natural process, is the periodicity of the process. So in the case of life, the life of a human being would be birth and death. But if so, then is Aristotle thinking that the end of human being, the function of a human being as a natural goal-directed process is death, the end of life? And again, I'm problematizing all these steps of the reasoning because most of us are very familiar with the function argument, but I think we find it too seductive in a way, we go along with it too easily perhaps. So is death the goal of the natural process that human life is? And here we need to look at Aristotle's metaphysics, where he tells us that life for an organism is a process that is not linear, but rather that has a ascent and descent. And that ascent and descent determine the periodicity of the process. So life for an organism is a process of development that goes towards the full formation of the organism. So roughly the point in life at which we all are, that's the process of the moment of ascent, the full development, and then there is a process of deterioration, where the organism slowly loses, or Aristotle puts it this way, the form of the organism loses grip on the matter, and the organism deteriorates. So the goal of life, conceived as a process, as a periodical process, is not that, but that point of ascent where the organism is fully formed and the form has full control on the matter that makes up an organism. So far, what we've been seeing is that Aristotle wants to find goodness in the performance of a certain process. In the case of moral goodness, Aristotle thinks that there is a process, a performance of being a human being, that one can perform well or not well, and the performing well or not well is going to be what is going to use as a criterion for distinguishing good and bad processes, and therefore moral goodness and moral badness. Now it's important, and I am emphasizing it again, that this process, that is the human life, it's a natural process which has a goal, but there is no agent that sets that external goal. If there's no agent that sets the goal for the process, but the process is natural and goal directed, then we want to ask the question, so where is the goal? Where do we find this goal? And Aristotle, in the function argument, as I presented to you, says that it is to be found in the process itself, rather than externally. But then the question is, how? How do we find this goal in the natural process, in the natural goal-directed process that life is? And here I begin my more interpretive part of Aristotle, the more original part of the paper. Aristotle's theory of moral truth, as we saw in the beginning, is such that he thinks there is a moral agent, a good moral agent, that works as functions as a measure for what is good. That is an achievement of the moral agent, that the moral agent obtains by performing well the function characteristic of human being, that is, being human. And if we just know how to perform well that function, we would do that, we would perform that function well, believes Aristotle, like Socrates. What's it that we should strive for if we want to perform well as human beings? What's it that is the true good rather than the phenomenal good or the apparent good? And Aristotle gives a definition that is, again, in Ethics, very famous passage, the activity of the soul in accordance with, or not without, rational principle. But what we're missing here, although there is an explicit statement of when a good agent performs well the activity that is characteristic of a human being and being a human being, although we have an explicit description now, what we're missing is understanding when is the activity of the soul in accordance to the rational principle. How do we know that? How do we determine that? What is the principle, basically? How do we attain truth? And then how do we then orient our life, our performance in order to achieve that true good? And here I'm taking you to a different part of Aristotle's system, to his theory of truth in general. So Aristotle famously holds that when we are searching for truth, the method we should follow is to look at opinions that have been passed on to us by our predecessors and test them and try to find what puzzles these views face, and sort of filter the views that we have received in such a way that only the credible ones, the coherent opinions, stand, and the ones that fall in contradiction we just discard. And that's how we proceed in finding truth. Now, the truth, in essence, of this view is coherence, is internal coherence within a system of beliefs that we have received by our predecessors. And that's all we get, by the way, so we cannot go beyond that. That's the best we can do, finding coherence, as opposed to sort of going beyond this set of beliefs. We can only find coherence in the set of beliefs we have received. And the interesting connection here is going to be with Putnam's internal realism. But leaving that aside, what I want to focus in is how is it that we find this coherence by applying reason. So when beliefs in our set of beliefs are incoherent, we find that out by applying our rational principle, namely rationality. Now, the method generalizes for Aristotle, although he doesn't say this explicitly, but the same method that allows us to find coherence among our sets of beliefs about the world is also the method that allows us to find moral truths as coherence among the moral beliefs we have. Moral truths for Aristotle are grasped in the same way as truths about the physical world, and they are tested on the basis of coherence rather than anything else. Now, why is all this relevant to my question of how the good agent becomes a good agent, performing well the function of being a good human being? Well, the good agent has to perform well that function, knowing how to perform that function well, and to know that, it needs to know what is it that it is to live well. So, I want to say that the internal coherence that Aristotle values as our way of attaining truths about the world and about moral values is also the principle that he uses for determining when is it that an agent is actually looking for implementing the morally good. In the sense that the naturally pleasant, the truly pleasant, is what is desired by a moral agent without internal conflict. So here the conflict is not between space-time kind of issues, like, I want to, be at the museum and I also want to be at this conference, but I can't be in two places at the same time. It's not that type of conflict. It's conflict between desires. So if I'm a good moral agent, all my internal desires will be aligned in such a way that I naturally desire to be at this conference, and I don't even feel the conflict with any other desire that I might possibly have. The type of coherence that characterizes beliefs about the world is also the type of coherence for Aristotle that characterizes moral truths, and it's also the type of coherence that characterizes the truly good moral agent. The truly good moral agent is an agent that doesn't experience any conflict of desire in desiring the good, and the good for him or her is just that he desires is coherent with everything else the agent desires. But the important point is that this is not a natural state of things. We're not born like good or bad moral agents. We become such. We become such with training. So what does Aristotle think moral training consists in? Well, moral agents for Aristotle are like athletes. We need to train our natural abilities in order to reach a certain ability to perform well in the function we perform. And how is it that we train ourselves? Well, not by nature, because that would be circular, but by using rationality. So rationality plays the role of judging the coherence among desires, and guides the agent in furthering her ability to pursue the good. So rationality is what helps us determining coherence among what we want, and also shaping our behavior in such a way that we can perform well in trying to reach the goals that we gave ourselves. Now, how is this all related to the issue of the objectivity of moral values? Can Aristotle, on the account I just gave you, take a realist position in relation to moral values? I don't know at this point how your intuitions are, but I hope at least I made the picture complex enough to then introduce the idea that for Aristotle, recall, an agent performs well when the activity of the soul is in accordance with the rational principle. Now, the key two words here are soul and rational principle, no matter how you prefer to translate them. The point is that soul and rational principle give us two coordinates within which the coherence among our desires is to be achieved. These coordinates are, on the one hand, the biological nature that we have as human beings, which set some constraints or limits on the kind of desires, needs, capacities we have. And on the other hand, the logical normativity of reason, the principle of contradiction, for example, that sets constraints or limits in what we want and desire and think about. So these two coordinates are important because they are common to all human beings. So all human beings have a soul, have a certain biological makeup, and all human beings have rationality, at least at a certain age onwards. And so these two coordinates that are common among all people make it the case that moral goodness is also common to all human beings. So what's interesting about Aristotle's position is that the morally good is species specific. So there is a certain moral goodness of human beings that will be different from the goodness of other forms of life. I don't know, aliens, for example, that do not share our biological makeup and our rationality. So it's species specific, but it's also objective. Why is it objective? Because within our species we all share the biological makeup we have and rationality. Further, if being a good human being is performing well in the activity of being a human, then it is a natural process that is goal-directed and is in the world. So I want to emphasize this is the difference between Plato and Aristotle. Where for Plato the form of good is in another world, the world of forms. For Aristotle, it's in this world, in performing well, the function that characterizes us as human beings. So what is a truly good human being? Well, the general criterion that Aristotle endorses is that a truly good human being is a human being that performs the human function well. A human being that lives well, we would say for short. Living well is living without internal conflict among our desires for the good. And that is something that we achieve as a result of training. So we have to, in a way, bring about this harmony between our desires to avoid contradiction and conflict between them. And how do we do this? By, on the one hand, being constrained by our biological makeup, on the other hand, making use of our rationality. It is when rationality shapes our desires, our psychological states, our beliefs, in conjunction with the type of biological nature we have, that the agent finds unity. Now, it's unity that has to be dynamic because it's a process that, in a way, is never ending. So it begins when we begin training ourselves, and it's a constant sort of activity we're engaged in. That's one of the points of the that functionality emphasizes. But it is objective. It's a sense of living well that is objective, that we all share, insofar as we share within our species the biological makeup we have, as well as the rationality that characterizes us as humans. And that's my conclusion. Thank you.